thank you for that kind introduction. I would also like to thank the Palestinian Solidarity Committee, the Events Co-Sponsorship Committee, the Center for Middle East Studies, and the Anthropology Department for all inviting me to the University of Texas to speak. And I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here this evening to hear me talk. I'm going to speak tonight about the Israel lobby and how it influences U.S. foreign policy. As you all know, Steve Walt, who teaches at Harvard, and I have recently published a book called The Israel Lobby and U.S. Foreign Policy, which makes three main arguments, each of which is very controversial. First, we maintain that there's a powerful interest group in the United States, which we call the Israel Lobby, and it helps shape American Middle East policy in profound ways. Second, we argue that most of the policies pushed by the lobby are not in America's national interest and not in Israel's interest either. Third, we say that the United States should end its special relationship with Israel and treat it the way it treats other democracies. Let me begin with a description of the relationship between Israel and the United States. To put it succinctly, the United States has a special relationship with Israel that has no parallel in American history. Indeed, as the late Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin once said, U.S. support for Israel is beyond compare in modern history. There are two dimensions to this special relationship. First, Israel is the largest recipient of U.S. economic and military aid. We give about $500 per year to each Israeli, even though Israel's per capita income is 29th in the world. In fact, since the end of World War II, it has received more foreign aid than any other country. Israel also gets consistent diplomatic backing from the United States, and we almost always take Israel's side in regional disputes. For example, since 1972, the United States has vetoed 42 UN security resolutions that were critical of Israel, which is greater than the combined total of all the vetoes cast by the other Security Council members for the same period. Furthermore, Israel is rarely ever criticized by U.S. officials, and certainly not by anyone who aspires to high office. Just look at the present presidential campaign, where every major candidate has been competing to show how devoted he or she is to Israel. Second, and probably most importantly, that aid is given unconditionally. In other words, Israel gets this aid even when it does things that the United States opposes, like building settlements in the occupied territories. This discussion raises the obvious question: what is the basis of the special relationship? Why does the United States give Israel so much aid and without any conditions? Israel's supporters offer three main explanations to account for that special relationship. Some maintain that Israel is a strategic asset for the United States. Now, it may have been during the Cold War, but the Cold War is over. Today, giving Israel nearly unconditional support is one of the reasons we have a terrorism problem, and it makes it harder to address a range of other issues in the Middle East. Support for Israel is not, I want to underline that word, it is not the only source of anti-Americanism, and our problems in the Middle East would not disappear if the United States had a more normal relationship with Israel. Furthermore, the United States does benefit from some forms of strategic cooperation with Israel, but it is hard to argue that giving it nearly unconditional backing is making the United States more popular around the world or making American citizens more secure. On balance, it is now a strategic liability. There's also said to be a moral rationale for the special relationship. Israel is said to be a democracy that shares our values. Yes, Israel is a democracy, but so are many other states, and none gets anywhere near as much support. The two countries certainly share some values, but Israel is a Jewish state which clearly privileges its Jewish citizens. Non-Jews are second-class citizens in theory and in practice. The United States, on the other hand, is a liberal democracy that works hard to treat all of its citizens equally. It is certainly not a Christian state. It treats non-Christians, which would include Jews, as second-class citizens. Indeed, that kind of discrimination, which is part of Israel's essence, is antithetical to the American way of life. Furthermore, Israel's treatment of its Palestinian subjects in the occupied territories is sharply at odds with U.S. values. Nor is Israel's behavior significantly better than the Palestinians. I will not go into details here, but any reasonably fair-minded look at the history of the region, including more recent histories written by Israeli historians, shows that both sides of this conflict have done many cruel things to each other. Please note that I am not saying that Israel acts worse than other countries. I'm just saying that it has not acted better. And so one cannot justify unconditional U.S. support by saying that Israel's behavior is exemplary. I want to emphasize there's a strong moral case for Israel's existence based on the long history of anti-Semitism. And Steve Walt and I believe that the United States should come to Israel's aid if its survival is in jeopardy. But its existence is fortunately not in jeopardy, and past crimes against the Jewish people do not justify giving Israel a blank check today. Finally, there's the claim that the American people have such a favorable view of Israel that they demand that their politicians back the special relationship. In other words, the United States supports Israel so generously and so unconditionally because there is broad public backing. Politicians are just doing what the public wants. This argument is not persuasive, however, if you look at the survey data on how Americans think about Israel. There is no question that Americans have a generally favorable image of Israel, in part because media coverage tends to be favorable. But the support is not especially deep, and it is not especially wide. Just to give two examples. A survey conducted for the Anti-Defamation League, and the ADL is one of the core institutions in the lobby, in 2005 found that 78% of Americans think that the United States should favor neither side in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Another survey conducted by the University of Maryland in 2003 found that over 70% of politically active Americans favored cutting aid to Israel if it refused to settle that conflict.